Greetings, fellow listeners. I will be your guide as we turn back the hands of time and space and dive into the obscure. Tonight's destination, 1991 for Hiruko the Goblin. Strap in and enjoy the ride. Greetings once again, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will be discussing the 1991 horror movie Hiruko the Goblin. But before we dive straight into the review, I want to talk about the film's director, Shinya Tsukamoto. Now usually, when I watch a movie, I'm immediately drawn towards whether or not the film has a good story. I don't care what kind of special effects or acting a movie has, so long as the story is good. In the case of Mr. Tsukamoto, that kind of goes out the window. I first got into Tetsuo because I was under the impression that it was a cyberpunk film, and I do love me some cyberpunk. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could prepare me for what I was to witness. In later years, he would add a plot to the outline and created the film Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer. Once more, a few years ago, he made a third film in the so-called trilogy called Tetsuo the Bullet Man, where there was a cohesive story that not only let us know what was going on, but also made sense. These films were not so much a trilogy, but more of an expansion of the same story. Along with these, he also did Bullet Ballet and A Snake of June, amongst many others. But we're not here to talk about these films. We're here to talk about Hiruko the Goblin. Tsukamoto's unique style of filmmaking is what drew me to his works. Strange, irreverent, odd. I can't stop watching his films. While I'm sure you can find a plot in Tetsuo the Iron Man, there's not really a point, as it was made from the concept of making a film with no point. So imagine my surprise when I found out about Hiruko the Goblin, a movie based off of a manga by Taijiro Morohoshi, and made to be, well, an actual movie, with plot, substance, character development, and so forth. Now, I've never read the manga, but I'd definitely love to check it out just to see how it stacks up against the movie. So how does Tsukamoto's first venture into actual filmmaking fare? Let's find out, shall we? Now, for those of you that are worried about spoilers, this review is pretty much nothing but spoilers. If you want to see the movie first, it is up on YouTube, although I don't know if it's subtitled. So you can watch it without having to track it down in physical form as I did years ago. For those of you that have seen the film or don't care that I ruin anything, then get ready for a doozy. Our film starts out and we are treated to the opening credits, which consist of a black screen with white text, and some appropriately atmospheric music. After a minute or two, the first thing we see is a pair of spinning brushes removing sand and debris from a fossil. Here we are introduced to Reijiro Hieda, who is at an excavation site with several other archaeologists. A couple of other dirt scientists get into a brief discussion about how Mr. Hieda was a rising star amongst the field of archaeology, but has now been reduced to just another guy looking for fossils. One of the men inquires if the dusters are a new invention of his, and he just nods and smiles. Next up, we are treated to an incredibly cute Japanese girl riding down a road on her bike in what has to be the most vibrant green field I have ever seen in the background. As she rides along, we can tell from her body movements and almost permanent smile that she is a very carefree and spirited person. Screen cuts to black, and a flashlight cuts through the darkness, revealing a subterranean watery tunnel. As Mr. Takashi Yabe inspects the walls, a girl's voice calls out his name from behind. Said girl is Reiko, the gal on the bike, and she tries to convince Mr. Yabe to let her tag along, but he continues to insist that she must leave. The scene shifts to a narration of a letter as Mr. Hieda walks down the street with an armful of groceries and makes his way to his apartment. The letter states that he should cheer up, even if it's for Akane's sake, and that a strange mound has been unearthed and that no one else knows about it but them. As Reijiro settles in at home, the narration continues on about how he believes that the mound was created by an ancient people to seal away an evil spirit. Is there really any other kind in these films? Here we learn that it was Reijiro's belief that goblins existed that got him ostracized by mainstream archaeology, but that the mound's existence could be the proof he needs to prove he was correct. Here we also learn that Reijiro is completely petrified of insects as he comedically attempts to kill a cockroach. We also learn that the letter was sent by none other than Mr. Yabe. Back in the cave, Reiko and Yabe look at the audience with horrified looks on their faces as something stalks them from the darkness. Suddenly, the thing in the darkness flies forth and drags Reiko and Mr. Yabe through the tunnel. As they are flying through the air, all they can do is scream and flail. Cue the title card. Next, we are greeted by three teenage boys, Masao, Aoi, and Katagiri, who are searching for Reiko and Mr. Yabe. Here we establish that Masao is Mr. Yabe's son and that he somehow injured his back. The trio stops by the pond near the school and attempt to fish out some beer they had stashed away, only to be spooked by the school's janitor Watanabe, who appears out of nowhere and inquires as to if the boys had been anywhere else, then tells them to stay away during school break, then abruptly leaves, prompting the boys to follow him. As they follow, they spy him carving into the school's walls with his sickle, and theorize that he may have had something to do with the two's disappearance. As they round the corner, they lose track of Watanabe, but spot Reiko inside one of the school's windows. Before they proceed, they notice another boy from their school, Kono, walk up to the window and ask her what's going on. She tells him that she was inside the mound with Mr. Yabe, but that he went home, then starts singing to herself. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm talking to someone who's just blankly staring into nothingness, and then they start singing to themselves, that's my cue to get the hell out of there. Kono, on the other hand, takes this as an opportunity to go inside and get a kiss from Reiko. As he leans in for a smooch, Masao walks off angrily and his friends follow him. As Kono's face gets close to Reiko's, Masao topples over, and his back starts to smoke. Puberty can be a bitch, let me tell you. As Masao starts to scream from the pain, a geyser of blood splatters the windows where Reiko and Kono were. Next we see Reijiro walking down a road carrying a large brown suitcase to Mr. Yabe's house. Inside, he kneels at a shrine with a picture of his dead wife Akane. Behind him sits Yabe's wife and mother-in-law, never really stated what she is. But the old woman informs him that Yabe and Reiko went to the mound some time ago, but neither of them had returned. In addition, the family heirloom, a crown, has also gone missing. Here we get a clue that Akane lost her life in one of Reijiro's expeditions before the old woman starts praying to Hiruko asking for forgiveness. Back in one of the classrooms, the three boys sit, Aoi and Katagiri drinking beer as Masao sits there without his shirt, revealing a massive burn on his back, as well as 2 bandages on each of his shoulders. Reijiro walks up to the school. As he looks on, something lurks in the schoolyard, then rushes inside the building. As Masao goes to cool off his back, a sensor in Reijiro's suitcase goes off like mad. The creature zips through the school at amazing speeds, but comes to a halt when it spies Masao at the far end of the hallway, putting water on his back. The creature rushes Masao, but before it can get to him, Reijiro crashes into him with a cart and carries him down the hallway as the creature crashes through the wall. The two eventually crash through a door and topple over onto the floor. Masao and Reijiro realize who each other are, then inquire as to what each other is doing at the school. Reijiro asks Masao if he has seen the goblin, spurring Masao to lash out and reveal that Akane was his aunt. Reijiro pulls out a device he constructed as kind of a goblin detector, which he's been using to track the creatures at the school. I never realized that archaeologists were so tech-savvy. Reijiro hands Masao the letter he got from his dad, pissing off Masao even further, as he doesn't believe in the existence of the mound. As Masao turns to walk away, he knocks over a potted plant, revealing Kono and Reiko's headless corpses. Reiko's holding a razor knife. The two flee the school, where Masao blames the events on the janitor, Watanabe, who at that moment cuts the phone lines with a sickle. Reijiro tries to call the cops, but when he can't get through, he suggests that they go on foot to get the police. Then Masao has a mental breakdown over the deaths of his 2 friends. As night falls, the two head back inside the school, where Reijiro reveals that he has built a goblin gun, more or less a glorified taser, and the two roam the halls for the creature. Eventually, the two make their way back to the classroom where Masao had left his friends, only to discover that they have vanished. As they rush down the halls to find the missing teens, Masao once again topples over as his back starts to burn. As Masao cools off his back, Reijiro takes notice that the burns look like faces. As they search the science room, Reijiro notices a pool of blood that leads into the next room. As he goes to investigate the other room, Masao stays behind. In the next room, Reijiro discovers Aoi's headless corpse, holding a large shard of glass in his hand. In the first room, Masao starts talking to what he believes is Aoi standing outside the window, and as Reijiro rushes out to tell him not to look, Masao sees that Aoi's head is perched on one of the tree branches outside the building. The two once again take to the halls to find Katagiri, and Masao screams out his belief that Watanabe is behind the murders. Outside of the school's kitchen, locks the door, then arms himself with a knife, only to get spooked when a pot falls on the floor behind him. Suddenly, all the pots fall down, and one of them lands on something which starts to move around. As the pot gets out of his line of sight, Katagiri moves in for a better look, only to see two pots that have been flipped over, as if they were hiding something. Katagiri moves the first pot and finds nothing. As he moves other pots out of the way to get to the secondary one of the ones he picks up has something in it. As he removes the lid, he finds Reiko's severed head and hurls the pot into one of the dark corners of the room. After a moment's pause, the song from earlier is heard again. As the singing continues, Reiko's head rises from the darkness, smiling as it sings. Masao and Reijiro reach the door and tell Katagiri to let them in, but the boy stands there as if he's being held back by something. The two rush around the back and break through the window just as Katagiri severs his head, spraying blood into the air manga style. It's a Japanese horror film. Were you expecting anything else? As Reijiro starts shocking the surrounding area with his goblin gun, Masao's back starts to burn once again. Reijiro ends up breaking his goblin gun, but pulls out a triple-headed drill from his suitcase as the creature zips around the room. As they try to track the creature, Reiko's head slams against the wall next to Reijiro, freaking the two out before it gets dragged off by a tentacle. As they sit there, the goblin raider goes silent, and Masao has another breakdown as he finally realizes that the woman he loved is truly dead. After barricading themselves in, Reijiro discovers a report Mr. Yabe made about the mound and finds some pictures and drawings within, believing one of the sketches to be a representation of Hiruko. As he reads, he discovers a spell to rid themselves of the Hiruko threat, and the two come up with a plan and head out to stop the creature. The pond from earlier is shown, and Reiko's face can be seen in the lake, singing her song. Suddenly, she stops singing, and a set of large insectoid legs spring up on all sides of her face and moves onto dry land, revealing her face to be the creature's body. Reijiro sets up some traps, and then the two head out to find the mound. In the woods, they eventually stumble upon one of the two spells needed to seal up the mound, etched into the side of a large stone. Continuing on their way, they stumble upon Watanabe, who is pissed that they are still there. Masao manages to wrestle Watanabe's gun from him, and holds the man at bay as Reijiro finds a secondary spell etched onto a nearby rock, as well as an epitaph of a tiger, similar to the turtle statue outside of Mr. Yabe's house. At this time, Watanabe discovers the burns on Masao's back, and has a quiet realization as the two ride off on a bicycle. The two arrive back at the school, and Reijiro discovers that the goblin detector has been unplugged. As he reattaches the sensor, the radar goes off like mad, and the two spy the Reiko Hiruko perched on the wall behind them, causing the two to flee on the bike. As they make their way to a set of stairs, Reijiro drops the goblin radar, but before he can retrieve it, the creature reappears, forcing him to leave the radar behind. Eventually, the two get separated, and Masao takes refuge in the music room, only to hear Reiko's song. He spies what looks like Reiko playing the piano, and he tries talking to her, but he trips and realizes that it's just her head being puppeteered by the creature. Masao heads out the door as the creature attacks, and he shuts the door in its face and locks the door. As Reijiro tries to locate Masao, Watanabe finds him and wrestles his gun back, only to rush down the hallway, leaving Reijiro behind. Back to Masao, who is now wielding a chainsaw, and stumbles across Kono's head. With Masao distracted, Hiruko attacks. Masao starts having a hallucination of better times with Reiko and his family. Reiko starts inquiring about the spells, then commands Masao to cut his own throat and die. Smiling, Masao brings a chainsaw up to his own neck, but Reijiro finds him in the nick of time and swats the creature away with a mop, freeing Masao from the hallucination. The two ride off once again on the bike with the creature close behind them. With nowhere to go, they crash through one of the windows. Outside, the bike starts to fall apart and Hiruko attacks again, but is warded off with a combination of Reijiro's can of bug spray and a shotgun blast from Watanabe, who suddenly shows up. As Masao tries to keep Watanabe from blasting Reiko's face, that sounded kinda dirty, Hiruko sprouts wings and flies into a woodpile. As Watanabe goes in to finish off the creature, it flies out and latches onto his face before flying away as Masao's back starts to burn yet again. Time passes and the trio sit at a shrine discussing Hiruko's plans. As they talk, Watanabe notices his face burned upon Masao's back. Watanabe then relates a tale from 60 years prior when he was only 5, when there was a fire. Amongst the flames were hundreds of heads, screaming out in pain. and in the midst of the fire was a boy with 3 horns, who also had faces burned into his back. The boy made the flames disappear, and when the area was inspected, all the corpses had their heads removed as well. Years later, when the boy died, he told Watanabe to guard the mound and the school, ensuring that history did not repeat itself. Here we learn that the boy was in fact Tatsuhiko Yabe, Masao's grandfather. As it turns out, the crown taken by Yabe from the family shrine was the one used by Tatsuhiko years prior, and that it may still be within the mound. Watanabe then starts to wander off, and Masao notices a pair of stingers embedded in his neck. Fighting Hiruko's desire for him to kill the two, Watanabe marches into the woods and sacrifices his own life to save them. After reminiscing about the women they loved, Reijiro notices a stone statue of a guardian deity, and looks out over the cliff they are standing on. He pulls out the drawing of what he thought was supposed to be Hiruko, only to discover that it was actually a map, showing where the mound is, which the school happens to be directly on top of. After analyzing the map, they determine that the opening to the mound is inside the tool shed at the rear garden. Sure enough, they find the opening and head inside. Within they find a stone room with markings all across the walls, along with Mr. Yabe's pen. They conclude that Mr. Yabe had taken the crown and sealed himself within the mound. Armed only with a can of bug spray and a crowbar, Reijiro speaks the incantation and the wall opens up, revealing a path into the heart of the mound. Inside, they find a large open room with a massive pit in the center. Peering into the pit, they discover a massive horde of countless Hiruko creatures within. Shining into the pit is a pillar of light emanating from below the school's pond, where the Reiko Hiruko floats on the water's surface. As they watch, Masao accidentally knocks a rock over the edge, which bounces off of the crown, which is tucked inside of a pouch. After retrieving the pouch, they notice that the crown does not possess the 3 horns like in Watanabe's story. Inside the crown, they find a note Mr. Yabe had made with the Kojiki incantation to seal the door of the stone room. At this point, Mr. Yabe appears from behind some stone pillars. As the others start talking to him, he warns them to stay away as he is fighting from being taken over by the Hiruko. After a brief conversation, the goblins within the pit are alerted to Masao and Reijiro's presence, and a handful of them attack. Mr. Yabe buys them a little time by holding off the creatures, but is eventually taken over. The two flee back towards the stone room, but in their way is Hiruko versions of Reiko, Aoi, Kono, and Katagiri, as the Mr. Yabe Hiruko closes in from behind. The Reiko Hirukos shrieks, alerting the creatures in the pit, and a massive swarm of Hiruko creatures close in for the kill. The 4 near the entrance leap forwards, but Reijiro knocks Masao to the ground, preventing him from being attacked. Much to their surprise, the Kono, Aoi, and Katagiri Hirukos are holding back the swarm, the hosts retaining their humanity long enough for the 2 to escape. Reijiro cites the incantation to close the door, and he and Masao escape just as the door seals shut. As Reijiro goes to remove the spell that opened the door, it is revealed that the Reiko Hiruko slipped through and latches onto Reijiro's face, causing him to hallucinate at the time that his wife died. Hiruko commands Reijiro to open the door, and as he cites the incantation to release the creatures within the room, Masao notices that the crown has grown to 3 horns. As Masao starts to recite the Kojiki, he puts on the crown and the creatures erupt into flames. The Reiko Hiruko laughs defiantly as Masao finishes the incantation, sealing the creatures inside and sealing the door. Wasting no time, Masao quickly removes the spell, then notices that his back no longer bears the burns from before. As the 2 leave the mound, they notice the souls of those taken over by the Hiruko ascending into the heavens, freed from the grip of the creatures. Time passes and the 2 walk down the road Reijiro first arrived on. Reijiro decides to go back to the life that he and his wife enjoyed so much, but is still going to search for goblins. Masao decides to stay there and watch over the mound. Reijiro jokes about trying to find a good goblin and making a goblin detector that plays happy music. The 2 say their goodbyes, and as Reijiro crosses over the hill out of sight, Masao looks up at the clouds in the sky. And that, my friends, is the tale of Hiruko the Goblin. First off, I gotta admit, for a man who directed movies that had essentially very little plot, this movie has tons of it. It's a very finely written story and delivers the goods, but there are a few complaints. Not many, but a couple, so I guess we'll get those out of the way before we go anywhere else. There are a couple of continuity, I guess you could call them mistakes, but perhaps more like oversights. Firstly, the fact that they don't go to the cops. There was dialogue that suggested that was where they were going to go, but in the next shot they just walked back into the school as if it wasn't even a thing. Secondly, it's more of a nitpick, but there are a lot of scenes that appear to transition over a period of time that begins the next segment with them just sitting there. I suppose you could consider it a moment of them catching their breaths, but they just look so darn relaxed when the scene starts up. I don't know about you, but if there were small creatures that wanted to take my face for a joyride, I'd be a bit more panicked than these guys. Thirdly, when the tunnels are first depicted in the film, there's like a lot of water, but at the end of the film, all the water is gone and the passageways are bone dry. I'm sure that there's a scientific explanation, but come on, science be damned, I want continuity. Plus, with all of the, I guess we'll call them rest breaks, the story would have taken place over a couple of days as opposed to the night and part of a day that the story takes place in. And outside of that, this is a movie where you gotta understand the culture of Japan to fully appreciate it. I remember my first viewing being completely confounded by a lot of things, but after a couple years of studying Japanese culture and mythology, I actually comprehend and accept the elements of the film. I can guarantee that a lot of gaijin or foreigners to Japanese ideals are going to be lost in a lot of this stuff. You kinda gotta be more into the Obakemono or Yokai stories to really appreciate this one. Since I actually study up on Yokai, I really dig this film. But if I was just a fan of monster movies, this one would be way over my head like it originally was. But then again, this was made for domestic Japanese audiences, and I highly doubt that anyone outside of Japan was remotely considered as a demographic. With the nitpicking out of the way, let's get to the goods, and boy are there a lot of goods. First of all, the story. I really want to read the manga now. The concept is unique, from an American perspective, and the characters are not only likable, but also very believable, and that is where you gotta win me over. If I don't care about the characters, I don't care about the story or what happens to them. Aliens vs. Predator Requiem? I'm looking directly at you, you stinking pile of... Anyways, all the actors do a really good job here. They can sell the fact that they're scared for their lives and also unused to the situation, which for me was a breath of fresh air. I mean, how many movies have we seen where there happens to be an expert on whatever the situation may be, actually in the spot where the bad stuff is going down? It's like, oh, we got a killer bird problem, but oh look, we got a bird expert right freaking here to take charge of the situation. There's always an expert on hand in these kinds of films, but not here. Here, everyone seems to be a normal run-of-the-mill person, Reijiro's tendencies to make bizarre gizmos aside, but hell, living here, people don't assume that someone local builds kaiju suits either, and that's my passion. We got archaeologists and school kids, but we don't have a badass demon hunter who knows what to do. I just love it! Another touch that makes me like them is that funny things do happen. It's not an intentional, I'll do this to be funny kind of thing, but more of a, oops, I just did that, now I look like a dumbass kind of thing. Reijiro really hates bugs, and the moment the creature walks towards him before the Watanabe situation, Reijiro can do nothing but crawl backwards and throw whatever he's got on hand at it until he's down to just his can of bug spray, which he actually uses as if Hiruko's a bug. The actors do a fantastic job of selling their characters, but none so much as Megumi Ueno, who plays Reiko. As Reiko, she sells the fact that she is a caring and kind-hearted girl, and when she plays Hiruko, oh my god, does she do a fantastic job. As the monster, she's not afraid to do what might be considered silly by other people to sell the fact that she's not playing a girl now. She's playing a goblin. She contorts her face to look menacing, pissed, sad, annoyed, and many other emotions that the creature may have. I don't know too many people that can pull off this acting talent when they've got rubber bug legs strapped to their head. I like to pride myself as a suit actor, but even I don't think I can pull off what this girl does. Since I don't know where else in this review to put it, I'll talk about it here. The music. I really love the soundtrack, though it has an unusually anime sound to it. That's not a bad thing, and since this is based off of a manga, rather apropos, but there is one particular piece of music that I could almost swear was lifted and used in Evangelion along with other anime productions. I looked up the music director and he only did a couple of things, so he couldn't have done what I'm thinking of, but that doesn't mean that someone couldn't have bought his music and used it for things he wasn't associated with. Regardless of what the backstory may be, this music does have some nice beats, and the Hiruko theme that plays on the title cards is top-notch. Now let's talk about the movie references. There's a lot of things within this film that fellow horror buffs are going to catch on to. Some of the more prominent examples are many, many nods to John Carpenter's The Thing. Tsukamoto himself unashamedly admitted that that's where the look came from. Their heads with bug legs. I don't think he could have lied about it even if he wanted to. Even the Mr. Yabe decapitation scene is almost exactly played out like the Norse head separating from its body before it grew the spider legs. Plus, when the creatures attack someone, they latch onto their faces and force a tube down their throats, just like the facehuggers in the Alien films. So many references, it just makes me smile. Now the Hiruko themselves. First off, the design. I rather like the design of the Hiruko spiders. They're kind of your typical bug kind of thing, but they have these short stalk-like necks that end in snakish heads with no eyes. While not entirely original to look at, they do have a certain quality that I found appealing. Even the human head-wearing ones look pretty neat. I mean, yeah, they're just heads with bug legs, and in the case of the Reiko creature, wings, but it does lend to a pretty cool look for a horror film. Outside of the appearance, I also like how they kill, or rather get people to suicide themselves. They attack kind of like a siren from mythology. Bait people in with a song, show them heavy images, then just make them lob off their own heads, giving the creatures not only one less person to worry about, but also makeshift homes for themselves or others of their kind, even though the whole carrying around a human head thing is never explained. For me, the creepiest element is the fact that these people willingly lop off their own heads because they're just so happy. Brings a whole new meaning to killing them with kindness. Now let's get into the effects. The effects are a mixed bag, not only in how they were pulled off, but also how well they were pulled off. The creatures were realized as people with legs strapped to their heads while their bodies were hidden, animatronic puppets, rubber dummies, and stop-motion animation. The actors' faces with the bug legs were both well done, and not so well done. Some scenes looked absolutely fantastic, while others looked kinda hokey. Same can be said with the animatronic versions. When they were shot right, they looked good, but in other instances the lighting really gave away the fact that the faces were sculpted and looked like rubber. Even though they had their moments of not looking that great, I still prefer the look of a bad practical effect to bad CGI. At least there was a modicum of effort put in behind the practical effect. Now where the creatures truly excel is the stop motion. Not only am I just a stop motion fan, but the effects themselves are really smooth and look really good. If they would have had a bigger budget and a bit more time, I'm certain that they could have done them entirely with stop motion. But then again, that would have taken away from the tokusatsu fun factor. All in all, I love this movie. Originally, I would have given this a 5 out of 5, just because I like it so much. But I think I'll award it a 4, due to the minor little nitpicks and the fact that you have to understand Japanese culture to really get this movie. My hat's off to Mr. Tsukamoto for delivering one of my favorite yokai films, and making a movie that makes sense. Well, that's it for this installment of ObscuReview, so tune in next time when I find another movie no one's done on YouTube. Which is actually kind of hard to do. That's why it's taken me so long to get to this one. Until we meet again, boys and girls, good night, and may God bless.